Welcome to Mining the Key Store. I'm Brian Roma, your shopkeeper here on the channel that talks all things PKI, and we've got another session of The Vault. This is a PKI Solutions office hours session from July of 2020. They talk about things like HSM as a service and some best practices around getting creative with your subject alternative names, and then a whole host of other topics as they plow through as many questions as people can put in front of them over the course of an hour. As always, if you find value with this or anything else that's on the channel, we would love it if you would do all of the YouTube things, like, share, subscribe, hit the bell notification to let you know when new content is coming out. We've been going live over the last couple of weeks to just kind of kick the tires on the technology and make sure that everything is working okay. And, we'd love to interact with you more. So if you would do the YouTube things, you'll know when we have more content that's out there, and we can better bring things to you that you find valuable and help you move forward in your public key infrastructure / certificate authority journey. So without further ado, here is our next office hour session from July of 2020.
Welcome everybody. We are starting the July PKI Solutions office hours. Seeing everybody joining in. I love how we kind of have the same people almost every month, Jake. Do you recognize any of these names from month to month?
I do, and like I say, it's just a big circle. We all just switch places.
I know it's great. You better not piss anyone off, or you'll never be able to work in the.
That's right. This is the true. Don't burn any bridges.
That's right. If this is your first time joining us, welcome to office hours. This is our technical only live Q&A for the month. There's no slide decks, there's no pitching, there's no selling, so you have nothing to worry about here. If everyone's gotten a chance to join in, we'll be taking questions, and you're free to chat amongst yourselves. So in the chat panel, you guys can reach out and type away and let us know where you're from or things that are going on. Over on the Q&A side, you can post a question. If we see things that are of interest to us, we'll pop it over that way as well. We do have a new person joining us this week. He's a little shy, so Giovanni, if you want to turn your camera on. I know most people know that one of our usual people that has joined us in the past is Vadams. And Vadams is not available today. So the Vadams is doing a little recovery. He's doing well. He is just not in a verbal state. Jake, have you emailed or chat with Vadams in the last couple of days?
I've gotten emails from Vadams. I've been trying to leave him alone, let him rest.
Yeah,
I know he's still working. He's always working. But.
Yeah. When we were talking, we were expecting him to be gone for about a week and a half after this, and I think I actually got a chat from him 2 days after he left saying, I'm at the hospital, I'm online, I'm going to be back to work on Monday. So he's a workaholic. We just can't get him to take a day off. So we wanted to move ahead. Our thoughts are with him. I was actually pinging him a little bit about our assessment portal just before we got the things kicked off today. So it sounds like a couple of people, I'm just seeing some comments, had some sound issues, but it looks like there might be a prompt or something in your browser to get the audio turned on. So again, if you've got questions, post them over to the Q&A side, and we'll go through. This is really kind of our opportunity to connect with you, see what kind of questions or issues people are facing out there, and see what we can do. I thought maybe I'd throw out a topic for people. I'm curious to see if anyone's been doing anything with HSMs as a service. Jake, I know you and I have kind of talked about some of the services coming from Thales and Incipher and even Utamako. and HSMs as a service, but I know I haven't heard a whole lot from customers yet on these. Have you?
No, I haven't. I would like to very, very much. I know, initially we talked about different clients, whether it be a fit or not. And then there was kind of a change from, I think initially it was Encipher that possibly we could go on-prem to the cloud for our HSM service. Originally that wasn't a supported scenario. So I would really like to see how that's working, if any clients are actually implementing that.
Yeah. I see Darren mentioned that he's using the DPOD from Thales, so their data protection on demand, the Luna product side. Darren, is that a workload that you've got sitting in the cloud, or is that an on-premise, like a PKI at your office, or is it some type of workload up in the cloud? One of the things historically Thales and the DPOD had said was that there were issues with where workloads could actually be. I heard some rumblings that on-premise workloads were actually going to start working with DPOD, because originally it was designed for, say, something saying in Azure or AWS. There is Azure-based ADCS. So when DPOD first came out, they were really saying, well, the way we're getting traffic from the workload to us is we're doing some IP level kind of foolery and routing stuff, and really only works if your workload's sitting in Azure or AWS. Recently, though, they came back and said, hey, we think we've got the workload where it should work on site. Now, that came from a salesperson. And I said, are you sure? Because the last I heard, it wouldn't work with an on-prem PKI. And that's primarily what we see, Jake, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much all. That missing use case, that missing link is kind of the big piece right now that I'm curious about.
Yeah.
And then we get questions about, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And, kind of the feedback I've given to Thales on DPOD is, from a PKI perspective, there's not a lot of PKI sitting in the cloud from, say, an issuing CA, where DPOD's going to be effective. If we're going to put OCSP over there, then I could certainly see using something like DPOD as a potential solution for that. But on-prem, at least from a PKI perspective, is where the majority of the needs are. The flip side of that is I've been talking to Encipher, and Encipher's got a HSM as a service. And just a little bit of an aside there, I had reached out to them because I was thinking about what our next training class was going to be. And a long time ago, I had created a training class with the Encipher product in mind. It was essentially something we would go on site, and after an organization had the NCSE course, we would teach the vertical stack. How do you integrate that with ADCS? How do you set up OCSP? How do you set up NDIS to use the HSMs? Well, with the Encipher HSM as a service, I said, well, that would be a great training platform. We could take our training class, do it online like we currently do, and connect it to their Encipher as a service. Reaching out to them, there were some challenges. They essentially came back and said that the biggest challenge is everything we'd be doing from the training side would be NATing stuff over, because all of our lab environments get spun up. They're different VMs, different IPs, and an IP address range. And they said, well, we'd have to open a giant firewall port to allow all that stuff through. But the good thing is the Encipher approach is all VPN based. So essentially, you create a VPN, you got to do it from your firewall or from the host itself. You set up a VPN to the Encipher data center, which means the workload could be anywhere. So it will work with an on-prem setup, because you can either have your firewall do it, you could put a device there, or you can even do software-based VPN to the HSM as a service, and then it works on-prem or in the cloud. I see Giovanni, you were able to join. Can you hear us all right?
Yep. Am I audible?
Yeah, great. So Giovanni is substituting in for Vadums today. Giovanni joined us about 3 months
Don't
ago.
put that on him.
I'm not substituting for Vadums.
I didn't say it's another league MVP. I'm simply saying you're another talking head, so Jake doesn't get tired of talking to me.
Right.
But Giovanni, you've been with us for what, about 3 months now?
Yep. Slightly, like right over 3 months.
Yeah, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I've been doing PKI work for about 15 plus years. Did a lot of work on the Entrust and Microsoft PKI in the government space. So I spent about 10 years in DC with Homeland Security and Department of State. And now joined the big gurus here.
Big gurus. Well, welcome, and you have pretty big shoes to fill with Vadums out this week, but maybe
just say no. If Mark asks you something, just say no.
Can we do that, Giovanni? No.
No.
But he carries some swagger when he says it. So yeah. So
I still wore that Microsoft shirt.
There you go. So I'm seeing some great comments, people kind of talking about the Dpod stuff, but Azure HSM and AWS as an HSM service. Jake, I'm trying to remember, did you have a project recently that something was sitting in Azure or AWS HSM? Oh, I know, no, Giovanni. It was one of our clients that you did some assessment portal testing with, and they had their CA sitting in AWS and had an HSM.
Right. I think it was it was a single tier. That they used, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And no, in that case, the workload was sitting right in AWS and using the AWS HSM. Certainly it's worked and it's been around for a while. So there's a couple different ways. The downsides to again, the Azure or the AWS HSMs, as I always say, is you're kind of locked into the platform. If you're creating CAs that are going to exist for 5, 10, 20 years, you're stuck in that platform because your key is created in their HSM, and you're not moving that CA anywhere anytime soon. So I did see a question come in. David, I think I have a pretty good idea of this question, so I'll turn this one over to Jake. But David was asking if it's safe to allow users to submit SANs in the IIS form. So I think we're talking essentially about the certificate authority web enrollment site, that old set of HTML and ASP pages of allowing people to submit SANs when they're putting a certificate request in. Jake, what are your thoughts on that one?
Well, my thoughts are, assuming that, so there's a couple different routes you can go with the web enrollment. Is you're taking your request there that's already been generated, in which case it requires an additional setting that makes it less secure, being able to add those SANs after the fact. If it's during the initial creation, then it's there by default. So that tool, as it's aged and whatnot, still is used at a lot of clients, but a lot of times it's used as a fallback only for the administrators, because some of the other tools out there, Venafi, you name it, but they will actually stop you at times from making mistakes. So something I've seen come up several times is applications needing an IP address in a SAN field as opposed to in the IP field, and all the other providers, the managers, will stop you. IIS will, or web enrollment will spit it out. It doesn't care. So it's a bit of a backdoor that I see most of the clients using it. So that's where I see it. But as far as letting users do it, if it's during the initial creation, can we turn it off? I mean, it's if they have access, they have access to do it. So
Yeah, it's definitely one where it's a compromise, and not like we're compromising the security, but we're making a business compromise a little bit, because as you said, Jake, when the request is inside of the certificate request, inside of the CSR itself, we know that was generated on a host. It doesn't necessarily make the SAN any more or less legitimate, but in order to enable the website to allow those SANs to be added, you have to turn on the interface flag that allows subject alternative names to be added outside of the request. And that is CA wide. That's not just specific to the website. It means any certificate request that comes in could also be supplied with subject alternative names. So from a security perspective, a adversary could potentially watch a legitimate conversation of a request come in and say, oh, by the way, I'd like to have these subject alternative names injected as well, and they would be approved. So it's a difficult thing. There are some alternative options, but it's always, is it worth it? So one is, if you look at how certificates and details are done, one option is you make everything go to pending. And when it goes to pending, the CSR comes in, it's processed, it goes into the database, and then it sits there. At that point, it's just a row in the database. A CA administrator could go in and modify the information that's sitting inside of those tables to add in subject alternative names. And then the certificate's issued out, and then it has the information in there. Well, that's a lot of manual stuff. That is essentially what certificate lifecycle products do. So if you look at Keyfactor, Eventify, and AppViewX, many of them have workflows that allow you to do that kind of stuff. They're simply doing that for you. They're just doing it through their APIs and their modules to add in that information. So it certainly can be done. I think the reality is what we find is, don't turn it on unless you need it. If you need it, you need it. Control who's got access to it. But just know it's going to be turned on throughout the entire CA. There really is no way of restricting it, unfortunately.
Right.
Yeah. Let's see here. The other thing I was going to mention on the HSM as a service is, there are definitely some interesting things happening around the bring your own key, or BYOK, Azure Key Vault kinds of stuff, and we're definitely seeing a lot of customers using their HSMs for BYOK for SharePoint or Exchange or whatever those types of things are. I saw an interesting comment here where somebody was talking about, Joseph was saying exit strategies for workloads and creating your CAs in AWS or Azure and being stuck. An interesting thing would be to do a BYOK, get the key into Key Vault, and then have a CA sitting in Azure use Key Vault for its keys. There's a couple of problems. One is Microsoft, despite their promises to me 2 years ago, still hasn't come out with a cryptographic provider to allow ADCS to talk to Key Vault. So there's some missing pieces that we still have that are out there.
The stripping the key down too, when you upload it, there's a very specific order when we did that for the client and moved their keys out. To basically limit the permissions on that key that goes out there. I don't know if they give you the canned script to run, but I don't know how much that does, or as far as takes away from that key and how it can be used out there, even if it was. So
yeah. Have you seen the new? I think just in the last month or two, Microsoft posted new processes for getting keys into Key Vault via BYOK, but now support Luna, Mako, the Luna, Encipher, and then there was another one they were supporting. Was it Marvel or something else? They completely changed the whole BYOK. It's not limited to just Encipher now.
I saw that they were supporting what would be the Talos or the Luna SafeNet
Yeah.
products now, but I hadn't seen the other one. I saw because Talos is, or I'm sorry, Encipher is what we had worked with, and it was the only one supported at the time. So
yeah, and it's kind of this new process, and I haven't walked through it yet. You could still do the classic one that we've done, which is you create a key inside of the Encipher security world, you download the BYOK toolkit from Azure, and it basically inside of your HSM unwraps it from your security world and puts it into the Azure one, and then you send it up. Well, that obviously only worked with Encipher. That concept only exists there. So the new process is they kind of generate a pre-certificate, then you bring it to your HSM, and then they've got different tools for different HSMs, and you run or you sign something, and then you take it back. I haven't quite figured out exactly what they're accomplishing, but they're now supporting more than just Encipher range of HSMs. I know we had an issue with a customer trying to use Utamaco last year. I did note that Utamaco is not in the list of all the ones that were added.
right, and so we as a follow-on to that, we've also taken keys into Utamaco and then back out of Utamaco and then into Encipher through that journey as well. So
so I think there's of the changes that we're probably seeing the biggest impact to ADCS on a regular basis. There's probably more updates around HSM as a service, BYOK on a regular basis. There's still incomplete pictures. Now the idea of still running a root CA in the cloud still just doesn't have any plausible approaches so far. There isn't such a thing as an offline computer sitting in the cloud. Even if we could parse it to say, well, I could connect to the Azure control interface, but the computer itself doesn't have any network connections. Even that doesn't even really exist, because everything is through RDP or some other type of connectivity. And the idea of creating a root and having it online and available to a remote adversary really defeats the primary security purpose of the root. So let's see. I thought while we're waiting for some other questions to come in here, Giovanni, I thought maybe you could share a little bit about the OCSP article that you're working on and a little testing that you've been doing, trying to document one of the things that we've talked about for a while in the whole OCSP magic number. What can you share with us?
So I guess I can start with defining what the magic number is. So there's a setting via GPO or registry setting that states that after X amount of number of hits of a OCSP cached URL, it'll switch over to CRL. So a default setting is 50. So what that means is, as a client, if I reach out on the same URL 50 times, after that 51st time, I switch to the CRL, whatever's in the CDP value of the certificate. Or if there's another OCSP within the AIA container, we'll look for that. And that's assuming all the default settings. Now there are GPOs where you could say, hey, I prefer CDP first over OCSP, but X509 rules now are OCSP prior to. So I've been doing some testing with that magic number. I've played around with Wireshark and Prosmon with various Windows 10 clients against OCSP servers sitting on 2019 and 2016. And it's interesting because depending on what I've seen on the various browsers, sometimes it's not even cached. And I'm actually seeing intermittent responses on that. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, and this kind of goes back to the whole magic number thing, and we talk about this in the class, Jake, when we talk about how this is kind of an insidious thing, and I think you've got an example that you go to once in a while on this. Or maybe not.
No, actually, what I was going to say was kind of along these same lines. A couple of our clients have had some issues with Cisco ICE or IC, and it will give false positive or false negative. Basically, it will throw errors and generate a lot of logging to say it can't reach the online responder when it actually can. And,
Really?
and after a lot of research and a lot of looking into it, Cisco at the time, and this has been just about a year ago, but had said it was a known issue, basically disregard it, but it fills up logs. So
Yeah.
So it actually would work. We proved it via Wireshark. We could see the requests come in, but yet it was filling up the logs on a lot of these Cisco ISE implementations. So just something to know around online responder is even when it is supported by third parties, at least in the Microsoft way, it can be kind of quirky.
Yeah.
So,
I'm curious to see how many people are using OCSP.
I am too.
Yeah, so if you're watching this live, if you'll in the public chat area, I'd love to just see a thumbs up or a yes or something like that. I'm just curious to see how many people are using it. We talk about this in almost every design that we do, and we talk about how there's the pros and cons to it. There's more complexity, but one of the things that many people don't know that OCSP is capable of doing is detecting fraudulent certificates. And the downside to relying on CRLs is the fact that all that you really know about the validity of a certificate when looking at CRL is whether it was ever initially issued and then subsequently revoked. It doesn't actually tell you that a certificate is invalid, meaning it came from a CA where the key's been compromised, or perhaps came from your legitimate CA but doesn't exist in the database for some reason. So OCSP actually has the capability to go out and provide stateful information back that a certificate is suspect or it's potentially invalid. So exactly, Darren, deterministic good. It takes a little bit of effort. I disagree with Microsoft a little bit on how they currently state that the Microsoft Responder supports this. We have this in our hotfix list. It does take a little bit of effort to set up. So if you're interested in being able to detect fraudulent certificates, OCSP is a great way to go. But Microsoft doesn't make it easy. One, you have to decide you want to do it. You have to set it up. And then it goes back to what Giovanni is working on, is the magic number. So you get all this set up and you say, okay, I'm going to detect fraudulent certs. And then your domain controller, or because you're doing smart cards, suddenly decides after 50 authentications, it's just going to give up on OCSP and go back and do CRLs. Well, guess what? You're not going to get alerts of fraudulent certificates. So there's a lot of kind of gotchas when it comes to this, but it certainly is possible. The other component that's the complexity is whether a system is going to care. So if you're setting up the Cisco ICE or your third-party application or some firewall, you say, okay, we're going to do deterministic responses. We're going to send information about invalid certificates. And then the system just doesn't care. The developer who wrote that system simply said, oh, well, let's go look at OCSP and see if this thing's revoked or not. Well, when the error message comes back that's unknown, it may just lump that with good and not even care. So there's some complexity around using OCSP for that, but it is designed. So I think we got a couple of responses that people are using it. We're gonna come out with that article, Giovanni. I know we don't have a date on it because you're testing, but the intent is to create a blog article on the site, right?
Yep.
And it's something that we've known about for quite some time. We haven't done, other than a cursory blog, we haven't even tested this in Windows 10. So I know, Giovanni, you and I were just talking about this the other day, and you're trying to get it to break. Like can we?
I'm trying to get to the default. I want to see the match number in effect and switch to
exactly
to the CRL. Yeah.
So some of it is okay. No, we don't always get great intelligence from Microsoft when things change. So Is it a Windows 10 thing? Did something change Windows 8, or is it there, or is there a test flawed? So, any of these types of scenarios are always kind of hard to go about. And then, when you mentioned the browsers, Giovanni, one of the things that came to mind is many of the browsers are not following RFCs when it comes to the revocation checking, that they may not even necessarily be caring about that. So it may make sense to try, trying to think of like a more reliable way to do this, whether it's curl or OpenSSL or something else. It's like, or different browsers. It could be that you've got a browser that's just doing some soft checking and is acting different or something else.
Yeah, it's interesting because I did when I hit an SSL web server site on Internet Explorer version 11 on 2019 versus Windows 10, Wireshark will give me a different response. And then what I have to do is sometimes, and then of course, we all know the famous dash verify dash URL fetch that we use a lot in the field. That forces cache. So I believe that's helping, but again, I haven't had it fall back
except for OCSP. So that's what we were talking about.
Right.
So I actually had a conversation with Vic Keller several years ago when I wrote the advanced class, and I was creating the OCSP lab. And this is the blog article you were asking me about, Giovanni, of I was trying to create a lab where we could test and verify OCSP. And I was using the URL fetch verify, and Vic comes back and goes, oh yeah, I never completed the code. We'll go do OCSP, but we won't actually cache the OCSP response. Whereas when you do a URL fetch verify, it caches the CRL. So there's always these little nuances that we're going to run into. I see a couple responses on the OCSP. Joseph, you kind of commented about Axway and the problems with CRL updates being once a day. In the way I always look at OCSP is there's really two schools of thought, and then there's a third that's implied. One is OCSP was really designed to mitigate large CRLs. It wasn't something that was designed for something more timely. So what you find with a lot of OCSP systems is it's just a more efficient way of getting revocation. So whether our CRL is once a day or once a week, OCSP wasn't designed to change that. And certainly in Microsoft's case, they're using the CRL as its information source. We have a partnership with a company called Assertia. They're based in the UK. Their OCSP server can directly query and use the CA itself rather than the CRL. So it gets its information from the database. Well, that means you can define how often it does that. But the more frequent you do that, the more impact there is to your database, the more performance you're going to need on the CA. And then there's connectivity stuff. Having your OCSP server having the ability to directly talk to your CA means that thing that's talking to internet or DMZ clients is potentially exposed. So in some scenarios, it's not going to be a great update. So there's the school of thought around making it more efficient to move information. The other one being the deterministic responses, the invalid certificate detection. And then the third one is, how do I make this thing real time? I want it to be real time, or I think it's real time. And frankly, Jake, I think we've done assessments where I know one of the top things I always ask customers when they have OCSP is why? Why do you have OCSP? Right. Not that it's wrong, but why? What do you think it's doing for you?
It can, and kind of to Giovanni in his lab trying to make it fail. What we see a lot of times is a lot of clients aren't revoking mini certs and have a tiny CRL. So the online responder becomes overhead and it's just chatty, and you'd be better off with your CRL. So unless there's some other need. I know some third-party CAs. I can't remember if it was DigiCert or one of the others had a hard requirement. If you were going to use their service for an in-house CA, you had to have an online responder. So other than something like that driving it, is it really necessary or needed?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not something that we can look at and go, that's wrong. It's simply, you have it. What do you think it's doing for you? And I know I've certainly have seen my fair share of organizations that have said, yeah, we have OCSP. And I say, well, why? And they go, well, it's new. It's
Yeah.
it's better. That's right. It's another server. It gives me something else to do. Okay, well, there's probably some legitimacy around that, I guess. I saw another question come in. I'll turn this one over. I'll see if Jake or Giovanni, you guys want to do this one. Felix was asking, how would you solve to integrate Linux systems into auto enrollment? Use SCEP or NDIS or PowerShell. So essentially, they're looking for, now, how do they extend auto enrollment out to Linux and maybe even Macintosh systems, or all of those other types of client systems?
Well, so from my experience is Macs are usually handled by a product that a lot of times will get lumped in for managing the iOS devices as well. So or something along those lines. AirWatch. Drawing a blank on the other one right now. But to target Macs, on the Linux side, it could be a little bit different. It's going to be a third-party product. Mark, the product that that we have will accomplish that. Correct?
Yeah, we've got a partnership with a company called Revicent, and CertAccord is their product. It is just enrollment and management for essentially Linux, Macintosh, and Unix systems. There's also capabilities in the larger CLM products when you go to Keyfactor or Venafi that provide some capabilities there. But they also include reporting and metrics, and may be considerably more expensive, but if you already have one of them, they might be able to provide some of those capabilities. I think without having a third-party automated product, I see some comments here about AirWatch and MobileIron. That's certainly a place that we recommend for iOS and Apple types of devices, because they'll work kind of seamlessly across them. But they don't all have a great Linux integration side. So there's a lot of Red Hat out there, and there's a lot of web servers running that. I know I've talked to companies in the Silicon Valley, and they've got thousands of Red Hat servers running their public facing side, and they have certificate issues. So the enrollment portion, if it's not part of a larger reporting thing, may be solved by something like the CertAccord product. Otherwise, you really are kind of limited to SCEP or NDIS. But all that really is a enrollment protocol. You're going to have to write the intelligence on the client side to do the enrollment, find out how you're going to securely get the one-time passwords to it, and do renewals and that kind of process, as opposed to having a central system. What are you provisioning, when are they due, when are they expiring. There's definitely challenges, and I don't think we'll ever see really a considerable impact from Microsoft on improving the connectivity to Linux or iOS. I know we see great strides in AWS and being Linux friendly and being able to create Linux VMs and workloads, that kind of stuff, but I don't think it's going to extend to certificate services.
Yeah, I haven't seen. I've done, Jake, similar with AirWatch as well as Jamf.
Yeah, Jamf. That was it. That was the other one I couldn't think of.
Yeah, for the Mac devices.
Yeah, and I wonder about Jamf. I see a lot of clients that we're talking to that move from Jamf. I don't think I've seen anyone deploy Jamf new or have migrated to it. It could just be the customers we work with, or where in the process it is. But I know we come across it, but I don't. It almost seems like everybody's, we're in the process of moving away.
The way it was working on the Macs I had seen was a bit convoluted in that it went through the CA Web enroll, It wasn't making a call to the CA, so it was a little bit odd in that stopping. And no one told me this at the client in the middle of the migration when we took the CA out from underneath it, so that was a problem.
Yeah, I remember that of seeing where Jamf, rather than using NDIS and the whole SCEP protocol, decided to essentially screen scrape and automate a mini web browser to use the web enrollment site to get certificates. It was kind of, really? Somebody's doing automated enrollments by, I don't know exactly what they did, but they must have taken like a browser component and said, okay, well, if we just go here and we do this command and we send this data, we'll just automate enrollment through the web enrollment side, which was never intended to be done. But it solves some problems. I guess it gets you around the whole one-time password or retrieving a one-time password. And Mobile Iron and AirWatch have certainly moved to a point where they can sign in and scrape that out and work pretty well. I see Darren's also saying that we're moving from Jamf to Intune. That seems to be the number one. Like people seem to be moving to Intune in mass. I think the other one I see quite a bit is Mass 360. I think there's been a couple.
IBM product?
Yeah, the IBM Mass 360. So I think we've seen a few going that way as well.
My last customer went from AirWatch to Jamf. And it's interesting, in the AirWatch configuration, the way it asks you to speak to your CA, ADCS doesn't say Microsoft. It says, do you want to use SCEP or do you want to use a PKI? And then, right.
All right, Giovanni, we got another question. I'll turn this one to you. Kevin asked regarding certificate policy and practice statements. Do you normally see a single document covering both, or would you prefer to split the contents into two documents with the what and the how?
So I've seen both. I've seen single combination, and I think it goes to your organization and what type of policy and assurance levels they have. So in the government space, within the various subset of DHS, there were definitely two documents, and they were large documents. But I've seen in a few commercial spaces where it's a sort of an like an in-home PKI just used for client auth for maybe VPN. It's a combination, and in those cases they're not even also following the RFC to the T. But it's for auditing. And procedures.
And Jake, I mean that's kind of our standard approach when we do projects, right? Is a CP and a CPS. I've seen some bastardized versions that are out there. I've seen I wouldn't quite call it a 3-page combined CP/CPS, but I've certainly seen simplified ones. Have you ever come across one of these aberrations, Jake?
I find a lot of empty links. Good intentions at the time of build. Links that go off into nothing. And you and I had this conversation not too long ago. If that's the case, and it's been several years down the road, what are the chances that the clients are actually going to get around to doing that? So do you leave it at a dead link, or do you remove that and not publish it anywhere? So
and this is like where they've created their PKI, they added in the URL for CP/CPS, but it never got published.
It never came to be. Exactly.
Or I think we even talked about the hypothetical scenario, and we can see what everyone thinks here. We were talking about you create a PKI, you write the CP/CPS, but you never publish it, meaning you never really put it in the place where it's supposed to be. And in your PKI, you have the link that says this PKI is covered by the Contoso certificate policy, and you can find it here. Did it really happen? Like, is your certificate policy really in force? And I think we chatted a little bit about whether that's a legitimate claim or not. You wrote the policy, but it didn't get linked in the right place.
Yeah, I mean, in that case, it could be there and it could not be there. So I believe what we kind of landed on was, we can leave the link, and it wasn't causing this client any danger, but there was no policy.
Yeah,
and that was but the hope was still there that someday it would come around. But this has been a lot of years.
Yeah. And I think in a hypothetical sense, I made the argument that said, if the CPCPS had been written, but not published in the place it was supposed to be and not accessible, then it's probably null and void. And the reason for that is most of them, if they're following the RFC 3647, in there, the way that consent is done, typically to say all relying parties and participants in the PKI implicitly accept this policy when they accept a certificate. And the policy also says, here's where you can find a copy of the policy and where you can go. And the intent is, if you're going to participate in PKI, you go review the certificate policy, you say, I'm okay with all of these things, and then when you accept the certificate. If that information was never published, you can never really assert the fact that a participant saw the policy, accepted the policy implicitly or explicitly. And from an audit standpoint, I would expect an auditor to say that PKI is not in compliance. And further, any certificate that had been issued to date is not in compliance. And then you would probably have to go into a state of say, okay, can I now retroactively make this certificate policy in effect? Because do I really know that all of these policies were followed in the issuance and enrollment and participant responsibilities? So there's a small, just a small little thing of creating a perfect PKI, creating perfect CPCPS, but forgetting to link it in a place where participants should be able to get it and should be reading. It's kind of like the EULA. No, you get the software app on your iPhone. No one's reading that stuff, right? We all scroll through it. Same thing. Yes, the CP's there and no one reads through it, but there's kind of a implicit commercial expectation that, hey, it's your responsibility. But if the information's not there, I think there's a case to say that the PKI is not in compliance. So the other thing I was going to add on there, Giovanni, have you ever come across one of these scenarios of a CPS summary?
I have. But it ends up being up to interpretation.
Yeah.
So right, it's not detailed as a CPS.
Yeah.
So it could be when it comes to renewal, ensure you have a timestamp on when you log in, but it doesn't speak to the fact that you have MFN and role-based access. So I've seen a couple.
Yeah. So Kevin, the reason I'm bringing it up is it's probably not just a black and white of have one document or have two documents. You may actually have three documents, and you have a certificate policy that tends to be rather ephemeral and kind of states the requirements. CPS tends to sometimes be the secret sauce, the who, the what, who's got assignments, where are keys kept, stuff that you don't want participants or the general public to know. If you start listing out role owners and responsibilities, what office, what phone number, what safe, that's pretty sensitive stuff. So you may actually create a third document called a CPS summary that is a little more high level, like Giovanni was talking about, that is published, that gives a public view of what the CPS is without divulging all of the information you don't want shared. And I know one of the top things I go through when I work with customers and we're creating CPCPS is there's one sticking word that's in there, and it's the word public. It talks about the certificate policy must be public. The certificate practice statement must be made public. And the word public there, it is a subjective term. Are we talking about the world, the internet, the participants? And really, when we talk about the policy and the practice statements, we're talking about the participants. There's no reason why anyone outside of our PKI should have access to those documents unless we are working on potentially cross-signing or bridging with them. So I don't have to make my CP/CPS available on the internet to be in compliance if I'm a private PKI. But it does say I do have to make it available to my participants. And if I've got things I don't want my employees or potentially leaking out, then I may choose to create a CPS summary, and that's what's actually made available. Fun policy stuff. There's another question, Darren. I'll turn this from Darren. I'll turn this over to you, Jake. I know we don't come across OCSP stapling a whole lot, so I might be putting you on the spot on this one. But Darren asked, does OCSP stapling mitigate the performance issue of real-time database queries and response signing? Have you worked much with OCSP stapling?
No, I haven't, but I'm thinking about, I guess even getting it to real time.
Yeah.
In the first place, but
yeah, it wouldn't be real time. How about you, Giovanni? This is a little bit of an IIS or web server sort of thing. So I know I'm putting you guys on the spot here. Giovanni, have you worked with OCSP stapling before?
I haven't. So,
okay.
But as far as the performance piece, I would think so, because that web server is queuing way less than what could be, tens of thousands of clients that are sending their information to the CA or the responder, right, to get a response.
Exactly, and that's what's great about OCSP stapling is if you imagine the scenario of a client going to a website and needing to validate the certificate, the client's going to have to turn around, go to OCSP and query and get the information. Whereas with stapling, the web server went ahead and performed one query to validate its certificate or whatever parts of the chain it could. And then in the HTTPS handshake, it hands over not just its certificate, but says, hey, here's the stapled responses that have signed OCSP responses about these certificates. So rather than having 50,000 clients all going to OCSP asking about the same thing, the web server does it once in a while and then still goes to the same place, still asks the same OCSP server. And because they're signed, it can send them down to the clients. The clients can look at them and go, do I trust this response? Is it a valid OCSP response? Does it come from a CA I trust? Well, now that OCSP server was only queried once. And for 50,000 clients, it's simply sent down as a transaction. So in that case, actually not having real-time information is better, because the longer that stapled OCSP response is, the less frequent the web server has to go there. But even if it's a short-lived one, it's just going to be the web server that goes there and sends the stapled response down. So OCSP stapling definitely does help a lot from a performance standpoint if you've got a supported browser, if you've got a supported web server that does it, and may not be able to validate the entire chain through the stapling, but it definitely is a nice strategy that you can use. The good thing is, like, IIS does this automatically. So the stapled responses going down are generally something that happens by default, but from a public standpoint, most people don't use IIS for public-facing web servers. So it may take a little bit of configuration to make it work. Saw a lot of comments come in still on the mobile side. People talk about Zen Mobile and Intune. Moving to Intune, one of the big things, like typical Microsoft thing, how do you get a lot of people? You give it away for free. So no, Intune being part of Microsoft 365 is a hard price to beat. I'm sure these guys, Jake, Giovanni, and the rest of the team have slowly been seeing things changing on our end as we've been shifting our Azure licenses over to Microsoft 365 behind the scenes. I know my phone just pinged me yesterday to start increasing the security around my email stuff. Did you guys get that too?
Yeah, I got that this morning.
Free Intune. It's always a great thing. Yeah. You're welcome. You're welcome. Let's see here. Got a couple more things to go through as we reach the top of the hour, but one of the things we still have been seeing a lot of comments coming in and questions about the browser change September 1st, essentially around 1 year SSL TLS certificates. This is the item that had gone to the CAB forum last year. It did not pass, but then we saw both Mozilla and Apple now saying that they're going to start enforcing this 1 year lifetime for public-facing SSL TLS certificates. And they've been clear in saying it should be public. But I know in the past we have seen issues with some of the intended changes, such as the enforcement of SANs over subject names, the switch from SHA-1 to SHA-256, bleeding over inadvertently or sloppily and affecting internal systems. So the blog article that we have essentially says you should be aware of it. No one really knows if it will catch some internal PKIs. Anything that you issue up to and including August 31st shouldn't be affected by this. It's certificates issued as of September 1. The thing to be aware of is if you've got 2 year templates, come September 1, September 2, it's probably worth checking to see if your PKI is somehow going to be affected by this. There is no fix or workaround. Some of the browsers have settings that say include or exclude the enterprise. It could be yours has been flipped. But if yours isn't flipped and you're just getting caught in because of the way that you're getting certificates, we have many customers that have their CAs that are run by commercial entities like DigiCert and GlobalSign that may inadvertently get caught up in it. And as a result, their certificates could be impacted. And in that case, your only solution may be to change to a 1 year template. So I know we've been getting more questions around certificate lifecycle products and management solutions. So, if you had a workload dealing with 2 year lifetimes and now everything's going to be 1 year, it's definitely going to be a bigger impact. Let's see if we got any remaining questions. I think we've got time for one last one. Joseph asked, you mentioned SCEP. Could you compare and contrast SCEP 2011 with the enrollment and auto renewal technologies that AWS is using with AWS Manager? Jake, Giovanni, I don't think either one of you have done much with the AWS kind of PKI or enrollment kind of stuff, right?
I started to go down that path, researching for a client that we're trying to decide, and they went away from it. So I never continued on to know. I do know it becomes very proprietary how AWS does its management. It's a separate process.
Yeah.
So I don't know how their manager works very well.
How about you, Giovanni? Have you ever touched any of the AWS enrollment stuff?
No, I haven't.
Yeah. I don't think it's fair to compare SCEP with it. The AWS Certificate Manager has a few different options that work across different places. There's even a model where you can generate certificates yourself using a PKI or even OpenSSL. And bringing them into the AWS Certificate Manager and using them to provision or control access based off of those identities. In general, when we talk about technologies, and I think Darren or someone else had a comment earlier about better enrollment protocols, there's definitely things like Acme and newer protocols that are more modern than are available with certificate services. I'll freely admit that. I think we're starting to see some of the lifecycle products like Keyfactor coming out with an Acme interface. I think that will probably be really help on the third-party side as well as IoT and the cloud side. I don't really expect any of those newer protocols to fix or change how Windows products do enrollment. And I think that's really why we don't see much change from Microsoft is the DCOM RPC or SESCEP largely fit the needs from a Windows perspective. And Microsoft doesn't really see a problem coming back and saying, hey, let's come out with new protocol. And when we look at things like Acme, that's all about how do we make Linux play better, or how do we automate beyond Windows. And my frank opinion is Microsoft still doesn't really care too much about that. I don't know if Jake, Giovanni, you guys have differing opinions on there, but I'm still amazed that my iPhone can actually talk to Exchange and Office 365 and get email. I think that's Microsoft's sense of playing fair.
I agree.
Yeah. All right, guys. Any parting thoughts before we wrap up today? Look at these guys. This busting at the seams.
I'm trying to channel my inner Vadams. No.
Yeah. Well, the good news, Vadams will be back with us next month. He and I are actually going to start collaborating on our next webinar coming up. We're going to talk about his SSL verifying tool that he has. We're going to talk a little bit about validating SSL TLS certificates, some of the troubleshooting. So if you want to come back later this month in July, we're going to be talking about SSL TLS certificates, using tools, what some of the common problems are there. We'll be back in August with another office hours. Vadams will be with us. We'll take your poll numbers and see if Giovanni is still part of the tribe, or if this
make it to the next session.
Exactly. And we will have this office hours back up on the web for on-demand replay later today. So if you want to share this with anyone else, you'll be able to go to pkisolutions.com/office hours, and they can watch this on demand. And keep your eyes posted. We'll send out an announcement as soon as we get the August one scheduled. So thanks for tuning in, everybody, and have a great July.